Every engineering project starts with the same questions. How do you get reality into a computer? Because before you can design something, measure something, simulate something, or manufacture something, you first need digital models. For years, I've been chasing better ways to create those models. And eventually, that journey led me to a research paper that completely changed how I thought about the problem. I've always loved turning real objects into digital ones. Not because it's the fastest workflow, but because it almost feels like science fiction. A few years ago, my sister invited me to a festival. There was music, food, people everywhere, the usual festival stuff. But tucked away in a corner was a small tent. Inside were these incredible sculptures. Huge animals, warriors, dragon, all built entirely from scrap metal. I absolutely loved them. I walked over to the artist and I asked if he'd mind if I take a 3D scan of it. There was just one tiny problem. I didn't even have a scanner. In fact, I didn't have a working camera. Mine had broken a few days before. So I borrowed the phone from my brother-in-law, walked around one of those sculptures and started taking photographs. Hundreds of them. At the time, I had no idea whether this even worked. Later that evening, I loaded the images into a photogrammetry program and watched something happen that still fascinates me today. A real object slowly became geometry. I was hooked. Since then, I've scanned basically anything that would stand still long enough. Because photogrammetry was something I absolutely love. But over the years, I kept running into the same problem. Sometimes you simply can't walk around the object. Maybe it's attached to a wall, maybe it's several meters high, maybe half of it is hidden. And suddenly this amazing technology becomes completely useless. Because no photographs means no geometry. Except the meshes you saw at the beginning of this video weren't made with photogrammetry. In fact, they couldn't have been. There simply wasn't enough information. Like most engineers, my first thought was incredibly simple. If photogrammetry needs more photographs, why not create the missing photographs? I actually spent weeks working on exactly that idea. The plan was straightforward. Take the photographs I had, use an image generation model to invent the missing camera angles, then feed it back into photogrammetry. Problem solved. At least that was the theory. Reality looked like this, complete disaster. So I abandoned the entire project and it never became a YouTube video. A few months later, an email landed in my inbox. Normally, when someone connects me about another revolutionary AI, I politely decline. Because most of the time, it's simply another product. This email was different. Instead of a product demo, they attached a research paper. As I started reading, one sentence made me stop. It described exactly the mistake I'd spent weeks making. Instead of asking, how do we create the missing photographs, they asked something completely different. Why are we creating more photographs in the first place? And that is where this story really begins. I still remember sitting at my desk, coffee on the side, highlighter in one hand, reading through the paper. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much. Then, halfway through the paper, I read a paragraph that made me stop. It was because it described almost exactly what I had been doing. This paper explains that many existing image to 3D workflows first create additional camera views, and only after reconstruct the geometry. I literally leaned back in my chair and thought, well, that's exactly what I built. I had spent weeks trying to solve the problem, and unknowingly ended up with almost exactly the same workflow the paper was arguing against. So let's quickly look at why. Imagine you're back in school. Do you remember playing Chinese whisper or telephone? One person whispers a sentence into the next person's ear, they whisper it into the next, then the next. By the time it reaches the last person, the blue car drove past the school has somehow become Grandma stole a kangaroo in Paris. Everyone laughs, because every person only changed the messaging a tiny little bit. But those tiny errors stack. The first generated image isn't perfect. The second is now based on the first one. The third is based on the second, and so on. And then photogrammetry happily assumes every single one of those photographs is actual measurement. So the final mesh isn't reconstructed from reality anymore. It's reconstructed from a long game of telephone. Then I turned the page, and this is where things became genuinely interesting. Instead of asking what should the missing photographs look like, the researchers asked something much simpler. Why are we generating more photographs in the first place? The goal was never to create images. The goal was always geometry. So why not predict the geometry directly? At first, that almost sounded too simple, until I realized what they had actually removed. They didn't just remove a step, they removed an entire chain of prediction. Instead of photo to prediction to prediction to geometry, the pipeline becomes photo to geometry. It's still making a prediction, but it's predicting the thing you actually want instead of several intermediate things first. As an engineer, that immediately made more sense to me. At this point, you might think, isn't this still just AI? Technically, yes, there are neural networks involved. But I honestly think putting this in the same mental box as ChatGPT or image generation misses the point. Calling this the same kind of AI feels like calling photogrammetry AI. Sure, there's machine learning algorithms involved under the hood, but nobody said I generated this sculpture with AI. They say I scanned it, because that's what the tool was designed to do. This model isn't trying to write poems. It isn't trying to paint pictures. It isn't trying to entertain us. It's trying to solve a very specific geometry problem. That philosophy immediately resonated with me. Not because I suddenly became excited about AI, but because I recognized an engineering mindset. Find the bottleneck, build one specific tool, solve exactly that problem. Then I reached a section about the training data. And honestly, I expected the next few pages to talk about millions or even billions of internet images. Instead, they mostly talked about geometry. The core of the training used a filtered subset of observers. Observers isn't a giant internet image scrape. It's a research database built around 3D model. That immediately made sense. After all, if you're trying to teach a model about geometry, why wouldn't you train it on actual geometry? Personally, I've been learning primarily from a documented 3D research database. It's much easier to understand than simply throwing billions of images from the internet at the problem. Then I turned another page and found what might have been my favorite idea in the entire paper. I had absolutely no idea how this thing even fits all of this geometry into memory. Because saying we predict geometry directly sounds great, but how do you actually do that? Where does all that geometry actually live? Because 3D data is huge. A single photograph might only be a few megabytes. A decent mesh can easily become hundreds of megabytes, sometimes even gigabytes. So if this model has learned hundreds of thousands of objects, where is all of that information stored? My first assumption was like, well, they probably just store enormous amounts of 3D data, which immediately creates another problem. Because storing 3D is expensive, really expensive. I assumed this thing must require an absurd amount of memory. Apparently, that's not what they do. This is where I found one of my favorite ideas in the entire paper. The authors call it triplanes. I'll be honest, that name didn't help me at all. But then I looked at the diagrams and suddenly I had one of those moments where you lean back in your chair and think, wait a second. Because I'd actually seen this exact principle before, just the other way around. Whenever 3D artists model something manually in Blender, one of the classic workflow is using 3 reference images, front, side, top. I've done exactly that myself countless times. So using 3 views to reconstruct geometry isn't new at all. That's not what they're doing. They're using the exact same idea backwards. Instead of taking 3 images to create a 3D object, they compress the 3D object into 3 learned feature planes. That never would have occurred to me, and honestly, I think it's kind of brilliant. I read quite a few research papers every year, and every now and then you come across an idea that's so elegant, you almost get annoyed. You didn't think of that yourself. This was one of those moments. Those 3 planes aren't photographs, they aren't orthographic projections, they're learned feature maps. You and I can't look at them and understand the geometry, but the neural model can. For it, those 3 planes become a compact summary of the entire object. Enough information to reconstruct the geometry later, without carrying around an enormous block of 3D data at all times. And then another realization hits me. Remember the game of telephone from earlier? The biggest problem with my old workflow wasn't just that it generated extra images. It was that every step had another opportunity to introduce error. Every step changes the information a little bit. This workflow suddenly looked surprisingly clean. Photo, mesh, that's it. No detour, no chain of generated camera angles, no unnecessary middlemen, just one prediction. There was one question left. Does any of this actually make better geometry?
So now to the part where you've probably been waiting on. Let's test that software for real. We will go first into something that photogrammetry or this kind of like generative algorithms are kind of known for, which is organic shapes. So this is the image I made, and I snapped this one photo, and here you can see the results. I think it looks great. Like, this is the texturized version, but of course you can only see a mesh quality without textures, but it looks great. It has even like some wood textures on it. It messed up the writing, so you would have to redo that, but that's kind of normal with those algorithms. As well as this little figure I photographed in our beautiful town hall. It looks good. I mean, it has some errors, but it looks overall good. It has a lot of detail, especially down here around like the dagger and like the hanging ornaments. But this is not really a challenge. So I already told you that in architecture, if there's something off, if it's not flat, your eye will realize immediately. This is this little chapel in the middle of Mittlere Brücke of Basel. So as you can see, I can't get behind it to scan it. So this technology helped me a lot in creating this. And I think it looks awesome. It even got the ornament on top of the building very well. It even has like the reflectiveness to it, and I can go around, and it did the backside very good. You can even see the shingles. And this one I could see to reuse in like gaming or 3D design or whatever, or of course for 3D printing. The next thing I wanted to test is something that I didn't expect the program to actually achieve. So I already told you that like mechanical parts, stuff that is very edgy and has straight lines and bevels and stuff like that are extremely hard to do. And this is where photogrammetry struggles the most. Every time I tried to digitize a mechanical model to have a base to start from, it completely failed. It was just garbage material. So I downloaded a picture of just a gearbox itself, and I put it into this algorithm with one photo. And I have to say, this is where the website impressed me. Here you can see the 3D model. It actually went and did all the teeth and everything correct. There are slight errors, especially like in this area or over here where the teasing is a little bit messed up. But if I remove the texture, the surfaces are flat. The bevels are like the same bevels everywhere. You have little errors, okay, but the algorithm actually understood if I have a hole here. And if I have a hole here, then probably because it's a mechanical part, the other side will look the same. Same with the axle. You can see on the original image that here is a little bit of like axle coming out. And so it assumed, hey, it's a mechanical part, so there will probably be some symmetry. So this is actually where I was impressed and where I think the training of direct 3D model actually helped this algorithm to understand what it's doing. So you remember my biggest question was, would I use it? Not instead of photogrammetry, not instead of CAD, but like as an additional tool. And with this success in mechanical part, actually, yes. Instead of grabbing my expensive 3D scanner and 3D scan the part and work from there, I would just snap a photo, create a model, scale it to size, and start working my CAD over it with measurements. The last test I want to do is special, not because it's hard to do or if it's a special kind of like obstacle for this algorithm, but because it is where this whole story started back then. The photo of this awesome wolf made out of scrap metal. Instead of crawling around on the floor and taking snapshots and my sister being on the side, probably pretending she isn't related to me anymore, I just uploaded one singular photograph. This is the outcome of it. So as you can see, here is the original image I uploaded. And this is the 3D reconstruction I did. I think it looks great. A little bit of the scrap metal is gone, I would say, but I also did that with photogrammetry earlier, where I have a little bit more detail, but this is more than I was hoping for. And actually what I also did is I recreated this in a low polygon version because I thought this wolf would look great in low poly. If you want to test it out, give it a go and see you another time.